How's it going, everyone? Cup Eskimo Joe here, and today I would like to make a video talking about telescopes, but specifically the journey and things I thought about when deciding, do I want a telescope, and what is the first telescope I should buy. Now, the one thing I want to preface with this video is, as you can see behind me, spoiler alert, this is the decision that I went with. This is a Dobsonian telescope. So the figures I've researched and the things I'm going to be touching on and talking about are all mostly going to involve and pertain to Dobsonian telescopes. This means that the landscape for Schmidt-Cassegrains and refractors in terms of price will probably be different, but a number of the things I have here will most likely cross over to all three types of telescopes. So with that in mind, let's get into the video. The first piece of advice I came across when getting into astronomy and researching telescopes is to start with binoculars. Binoculars are significantly cheaper than telescopes. This pair that I have here from Stellardrone costed me around $25 to $30, and it is the vehicle that I used to grow my love for astronomy. I still carry these to this day. They've just become a part of my kit, and I personally believe it is the most budget-friendly way to get into astronomy. Pick up a pair of binoculars, see if you use them. Is it something that you like? Do you enjoy, using it? Do you actually go out frequently enough to justify buying a telescope? In my case, the answer was yes, but this is a much easier way to determine that financially and in terms of moving it around than jumping right for a telescope. Now, a tripod is useful for binoculars. I didn't have that. My arms felt like noodles, so it became very difficult to consistently look at stuff, but I didn't want to spend a lot of money, and this seemed like a great way to do it, and it was. Now, you might wonder or question, what are some things that I can see with binoculars? So, three of my favorite targets to view with them, and that I still do with them to this day, is the moon, great target for binoculars, Jupiter, and you're also able to see the 4 Galilean moons, so that's pretty cool, and Saturn. They can pick up enough detail to get Saturn's rings. It's still going to be small and hard to see, but you can get just enough of a gap to realize that there are rings there. So those were super cool for me, and as soon as I realized that I was able to do planetary viewing with binoculars, I knew that I wanted a telescope. They're also really, really good for constellations because they have a wider field of view, although a lot of times you can just, look at constellations with your eyes. There you are. You've got your binoculars. You enjoy using them frequently, and you find yourself wanting more. So in my case, this was the point that I realized it was time to buy the first telescope. Now, like I said at the beginning of the video, for me, I went with a Dobsonian. The reason I went with a Dobsonian is because they're going to bring you the best bang for your buck. So pretty much the most affordable but still quality telescopes that are going to have the biggest mirrors and greatest light collecting capabilities are going to fall under Dobsonians. Now, within Dobsonian telescopes, there are two primary styles that I encountered. The one behind me is a tabletop Dobsonian, and then there's a style called a floor standing model, or that I'm going to call it a floor standing model, that's larger, doesn't need anything to stand on because the base is big enough to go all the way down to the floor. So there are a few different factors that I personally considered when deciding between these two styles of Dobsonians, and those factors are what we're going to cover here next. I want to talk about cost a little bit now because it's going to be one of the big deciding factors you consider when buying your first telescope. And the first point for cost I'd like to make is to avoid going too cheap. In my research for telescopes, I found a good handful of them falling in the $75 to $150 price range, but most, if not all of those products are not going to be very good. And the user experience you have with them may end up hindering your astronomy journey more than it ends up helping it. Keeping that in mind, for tabletop models such as the one I have back here, the good entry-level price point I found is right around $250 to $350. The one you see behind me starts at $310, and I feel confident recommending it as a quality starter telescope, again, of the tabletop variety. If you're going to look at a floor standing Dobsonian, which is the first kind I was looking at, those are going to start with more of an entry point of around $400 to $500 to maybe $600 to $700. And that price range, I'm confident, based off other telescopes I've gotten to view in, is going to bring you a quality viewing experience for the floor standing style of Dobsonian. Let's talk about size and weight of the telescope next. This is going to be a big factor as well when choosing your first telescope, because you got to be able to move it and take it outside and bring it places to be able to use it. I've encountered people who were excited. They went out and purchased their first telescope only to realize that they weren't able to lift it and move it around easily or at all. And so in order for them to be able to use it, they were relegated to waiting until somebody else was around to help them move it. So this is definitely worth considering. The 8-inch floor standing model that I was originally looking at was about 50 pounds total. Between the OTA, the tube itself, and the base, together it was around 50 pounds to carry. The tabletop unit behind me is closer to 23, 24 pounds with both things together. And because in both cases, the OTA usually detaches from the base, you are able to lift and carry both things separately. But consider how difficult you want it to be to move it, what your capabilities are for carrying, and just how heavy and cumbersome you want the telescope to be when considering purchasing your first telescope. I would like to add that this issue will be the worse with Dobsonian models, because the bigger the mirrors get, the bigger the tube, the bigger the telescope gets. This is likely one area where Cassegrains and refractors have a real advantage, because they're a lot smaller and most likely lighter than the Dobsonians as a result. Now let's talk about one final big question that I had asked myself when researching my first telescope, which is manual or electronic. Now, the model I have here, the Skywatcher Heritage 150p, is a manual model. I am the one tracking and moving it myself and pointing at the night sky targets I'm choosing to view. This was something I valued as important as in my journey as a budding astronomer, but when making your decision, think about your needs and what other things you're going to be doing and kind of what you want to spend your time with when you're using your telescope. So if you value pointing on your own and you want the experience of being the person who is finding the targets yourself, select a manual model. But if you want the telescope to track for you to where you're choosing to look, so that you can spend maybe more time actually looking at your targets and not trying to find your targets, then it's possible that an electronic model is for you. One thing I'm going to cover here is that there is a price difference to consider when you're talking about a manual model or electronic model. So I'm going to use mine as an example. The Skywatcher Heritage 150p here is $310. It has a electronic counterpart where the OTA, the tube, is pretty much the same, but the base is motorized and programmable, and that version is $470. So as you can see in this one example, there's about $160 difference between getting the manual version and getting the electronic version of a telescope. If you select the tabletop style of Dobsonian, such as I did, you're going to be faced with one additional choice that doesn't come with the floor standing model, and that is something stable to put it on. Now, what I have, and I'm going to lift it up here next to me in a second, is a floor standing tabletop tripod that I found plans for online and ended up building. This isn't the only route you can go, though. I would wager that a folding table isn't going to be sturdy enough without modifications, and also a tub isn't going to be sturdy enough without modifications. But I'm sure you could rig or modify those things to create a cheap, stable solution. A table, like not a fold out, a more solid table of some kind would likely work too, hence tabletop model. And there is also the consideration of a tripod if you wanted to affix the tube to a tripod and not to its base. I didn't go this route because of cost. When I started researching tripods, the price I was going to spend was reaching into the territory of the floor standing model, in which case I would have just gone for the bigger telescope. But once I was able to find plans and build this, it cost me about $50 for the project. It didn't add a whole lot of cost to the end result. Another factor is weight, though. Let's say cost is less of a concern for you, but weight is more important and you're not able to carry a big Dobsonian tube. Maybe a model like this is good because the tube itself is light and easy to carry, and you could also get yourself a tripod that too is relatively light and easy to carry. And that's about it for today's video. These are the factors that I considered when selecting my first telescope, and I really hope that you're going to find this information as useful as I did. And so with that, I bid you all go outside tonight and take a look up at the stars.